Lena had always been the responsible one, the one everyone relied on without thinking twice. Her life had been mapped out by her family's needs rather than her own desires. Ever since she was a teenager, her mother had labeled her as the dependable child, the one who could manage chaos while others ran from it. It was her sister Melissa who always got the praise, who seemed to float through life untouched by responsibility. Lena never minded, at least she told herself she didn't, because she loved her family. But love was supposed to be mutual, wasn't it? She began to notice the cracks when small favors turned into expectations, and expectations into a lifestyle she hadn't chosen. It was her birthday, 30 years old, and Lena thought maybe, just maybe, things would be different this year. She imagined a quiet celebration, laughter without her having to serve or manage it, a dinner where she could sit back and feel appreciated. But nothing about her life had ever followed the map she drew for herself. She had learned that the hard way. She arrived at her parents' house, carrying a small gift for her mother, hoping the day would be simple. But as soon as she stepped inside, the old pattern began to surface. Her siblings greeted her warmly, but with that familiar undercurrent of expectation that she would handle anything that might go wrong. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but Lena felt it instantly, like a cold wind brushing against her back. Dinner started normally enough. Candles flickered on the table, and the scent of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the room. Lena tried to smile, to immerse herself in the warmth of her family. Then, halfway through the meal, Melissa leaned back in her chair, clinking her glass for attention. "Lena," she said, her voice bright and casual, "the kids are getting fussy. Could you?" She trailed off, eyes already drifting to her phone, signaling that she didn't really care what Lena said. As long as someone took the responsibility. Lena froze, holding her fork mid-air. She looked at her mother, expecting, hoping for a break, a gentle reminder that tonight was her day. But her mother, instead of speaking up for her, laughed softly. "Well, she's always been the most responsible. Let her handle it," she said, her tone warm but dismissive. Lena's heart sank. She forced herself to nod and get up, following Melissa's silent gesture toward the living room, where Melissa's children were fussing. She took the crying toddlers in her arms, but the warmth she expected from the gesture of family appreciation never came. She felt invisible, her sacrifices unnoticed, her years of service reduced to a passing comment. After putting the children to bed and tidying up their mess, Lena returned to the dining room to grab a glass of water. That's when she overheard Melissa whispering to their mother in the kitchen. She couldn't catch everything at first, but the words she did hear cut deeper than any insult. She should be grateful. She doesn't have a real family to worry about. The words were light, almost flippant, but the meaning was heavy, like stones pressing against her chest. Lena felt something dark stir inside her, a combination of hurt, anger, and disbelief. She realized in that moment that her family had always seen her as someone who existed to support them, someone who could be counted on, someone who never complained. But they had never seen her. They had never cared for her feelings or recognized the toll it took to carry their responsibilities on her shoulders. She went to her room that night, sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. Her birthday, the day she had hoped would be special, had instead reminded her how little she mattered in her family's eyes. The betrayal wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, like a shadow that had been following her all her life, finally stepping into the light. And for the first time, Lena allowed herself to feel the full weight of it. Her love for her family, her patience, her endless support, They had all been taken for granted, used as a convenience, and then dismissed. It was a bitter revelation, one that left her chest tight and her mind racing. That night, she thought about her past. She remembered countless family events she had spent cleaning up messes, soothing arguments, and putting herself last. She remembered the holidays where she had stayed behind to care for younger cousins while Melissa and others enjoyed the celebration. She remembered the words of her mother, the faint smile that suggested she was proud, when in reality she was blind to Lena's exhaustion. And she remembered feeling powerless every single time, as if the world had conspired to ensure her sacrifices went unnoticed. Lena realized that her resentment had been growing for years, but it had been buried under the weight of duty and love. That night, though, the resentment bubbled to the surface. The whispered words she overheard, so careless, so cruel, had ignited a spark she could no longer ignore. The thought of revenge crossed her mind, though at first it felt impossible. Lena wasn't a vindictive person. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who forgave, who smoothed things over. But the idea planted itself, quiet at first, then growing stronger. What if she didn't forgive? What if she finally allowed herself to assert her worth? Could she make them feel, even for a moment, the weight of what they had done to her? She didn't sleep that night. She turned over scenarios. In her mind, small acts of defiance that could shake the dynamic she had endured her whole life. It wasn't about hurting anyone, at least not at first. It was about reclaiming a part of herself that had been ignored. She thought about the next family gathering, the next time Melissa expected her to drop everything. She imagined telling her mother, "No, not this time. Not anymore." She imagined a world where her life wasn't dictated by the convenience of others. The feeling of imagining that power, of finally asserting herself, gave her a rush she hadn't felt in years. By morning, Lena had a sense of clarity she had never experienced before. She walked through her day differently, more aware of her own needs and limits. Even as she made breakfast for herself and prepared for work, she carried a quiet fire within her, a determination to no longer be invisible, no longer be the family babysitter, no longer be the one who sacrificed endlessly while others assumed. It was natural. The betrayal of that birthday night had awakened something deep within her, a need for recognition, a need to assert her value, and, yes, a desire for revenge, not petty, not mean, but calculated, thoughtful, and meant to reclaim what was always hers: respect. After that night, Lena's world shifted. She could no longer ignore the anger simmering inside her. The betrayal had opened a door, and once she stepped through it, there was no going back. She spent days replaying every moment, every comment, every slight that had been brushed off as normal family life. She remembered birthdays spent cleaning, holidays ruined by last-minute babysitting duties, and all the times she had swallowed her frustration to keep peace. The thought that her family had never truly seen her, had never valued her beyond her usefulness, fueled a fire she couldn't contain. Lena realized that she had been living under a mask, smiling and nodding, while resentment quietly built inside her. She could feel it now, growing stronger, demanding attention. At first, Lena didn't know how to act on it. She was not reckless. She was careful, precise, and methodical. Her revenge couldn't be dramatic or childish. It had to be deliberate, controlled, and meaningful. The first step was understanding the people she had spent her life supporting. Melissa, the sister everyone adored, thrived on being admired. She had grown accustomed to Lena's constant availability. Lena knew that by changing her behavior, she could unsettle her sister without raising a fight. She realized that the greatest power she held was simply saying no and standing her ground. It was revolutionary, terrifying, and intoxicating. All at once, the first test came sooner than she expected. Melissa called one afternoon, her voice sweet and casual, asking if Lena could watch the kids for an hour while she ran errands. Lena felt the familiar tug of obligation, the automatic response to say yes. But this time, she paused. She imagined the hurt she had felt on her birthday, the countless nights and days she had sacrificed without recognition. She felt the fire inside her eyes. "I can't," she said firmly. The words felt strange in her mouth, like a weight lifted and a knife simultaneously. Melissa stuttered on the other end, shock and disbelief cracking her perfect composure. You always can," she said, as if Lena's refusal was unthinkable. "Not anymore," Lena replied. And then she hung up. The silence that followed was powerful. Lena felt it in her chest, a mix of exhilaration and fear. She had disrupted the balance that had existed for decades. For the first time, she had acted entirely for herself. The small victory felt monumental, yet it came with unease. Her mind raced with questions. Was she cruel? Was she being unfair? Could she sustain this newfound assertiveness without becoming someone she didn't recognize? These thoughts circled like vultures, preying on her sense of morality. She realized that revenge was not a simple act. It was a journey through complicated emotions, a test of her own limits and character. As days passed, Lena's actions became bolder. She set boundaries everywhere, at home, at work, and in her personal life. She refused calls at odd hours. She declined favors that were expected as automatic. And she started saying no without guilt. Each refusal was a small strike, a quiet challenge to the narrative that had defined her life. Her family reacted as expected. Her mother's voice, usually calm and guiding, now carried tension. "You're changing, Lena. I don't know why," she said one evening, worry tinged with fear. Lena didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She simply held her ground, letting her mother feel the absence she had long ignored. Melissa, on the other hand, oscillated between confusion and irritation. She didn't understand why the sister who had always complied, who had always been present, was suddenly absent or resistant. She tried to charm, to guilt, to manipulate. None of it worked. Lena watched carefully, learning the patterns of her family, observing the cracks that had always been there, but were now widening under her refusal to be invisible. Her revenge was taking shape, not as a public spectacle, but as a quiet, unrelenting assertion of self-worth. She began to realize that true revenge was not about retaliation. It was about transformation. She was reshaping her own life, and the ripples of that change unsettled everyone else. The psychological effect of this shift was profound. Lena found herself oscillating between empowerment and guilt. The fire that had started as anger was now tempered with reflection. She saw the potential for growth, but also the danger of becoming someone hardened by resentment. She questioned herself constantly. Was she acting out of justice, or was she letting anger consume her? Each day was a balancing act, a test of patience and morality. The emotional stakes were high, and the tension never left her. She had imagined revenge as a moment of triumph, but it had become a complex journey of self-discovery, testing every fiber of her being. As she planned her next steps, Lena began documenting the moments that had hurt her, the birthdays, the overlooked efforts, the whispered betrayals. Writing them down made her feel validated, as if her story was finally being told, even if only to herself. She plotted her acts carefully. She didn't want to humiliate anyone or seek attention. She wanted acknowledgement, recognition for the sacrifices she had endured. Each no, each boundary, each small act of resistance became part of a larger Strategy not to hurt, but to make her family confront the reality they had ignored. The tension built as she imagined the potential outcomes. Anger, denial, apologies, or maybe even understanding. Lena also wrestled with her internal moral compass. She had always been empathetic, always considered the feelings of others. And now she had to confront the possibility that her actions could cause pain. Was it wrong to unsettle the people she loved, even if it was for her own good? She realized that revenge was not black and white. It was grey, complex, and messy. Every refusal carried consequences. Every boundary challenged her family's sense of entitlement. She felt both powerful and vulnerable at the same time. Her emotional state was a storm, chaotic yet clarifying, forcing her to understand who she really was and what she was willing to fight for. Through it all, Lena never lost sight of her ultimate goal, self-respect. She wanted her family to see her as more than just the dependable one, more than a caretaker, more than a shadow in their lives. The revenge she sought was not to destroy them, but to reclaim her identity. She had spent decades erasing herself for their comfort, and now she was finally asserting her presence. Each step forward was a statement. She was no longer invisible. The climax of part 2 came unexpectedly when Lena faced a small yet significant challenge. Her mother asked her to attend a family gathering and, as usual, expected her to manage everyone else. Lena's first instinct was to comply. Old habits die hard, but the fire that had been building within her reminded her of everything: the years of unacknowledged labor, the whispered words that cut deep, the birthday that had shattered her illusions. She paused, looked at her mother, and felt the weight of her own life pressing on her shoulders. For the first time, she could make a conscious choice: continue to sacrifice herself or assert her worth. "I can't," she said softly but firmly. Her mother's face fell, and for the first time, Lena saw a flicker of understanding, of awareness. It wasn't complete forgiveness or praise, but it was the beginning. Lena felt a thrill of both fear and liberation. She realized that revenge was not a single act, it was a process, a series of choices, each one demanding courage and clarity. She had entered a new chapter of her life, where power came not from punishing others, but from respecting herself. By the end of part 2, Lena had transformed. She was no longer merely the family babysitter. She was a woman asserting her identity, demanding recognition, and redefining her relationships. The tension had not disappeared, but it had changed shape, from anger at being wronged to a deliberate, controlled force guiding her actions. She had discovered the psychological truth of revenge. It is not the act itself, but the internal shift it produces, the courage to claim your own life, that matters most. And so, Lena waited. She watched her family adjust, struggle, and notice her absence. She prepared for the moment when the ultimate test would arrive, the point where she would decide whether to escalate, confront, or forgive. Every day brought new tension, new reflection, and new growth. The fire of revenge had become something more profound, a journey toward self-respect, awareness, and the possibility of true change. Weeks had passed since Lena first began asserting herself. The quiet rebellion, the small but deliberate refusals, had started to shift the dynamic of her family. Her mother seemed more cautious, less willing to assume Lena's automatic compliance. Melissa, on the other hand, was visibly unsettled, no longer confident that her sister would drop everything at her convenience. But Lena had learned that true power lay in patience and precision. The ultimate moment of reckoning had not yet come, and she knew she had to wait for it to arrive naturally, when the stakes were high and her choice would carry real consequences. Opportunity arrived on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Lena decided to visit her mother, sensing that the tension between them had reached the tipping point. The house was familiar but different now. Silence replaced the usual hum of activity, and everything felt charged with anticipation. Her mother sat at the dining table, hands folded, eyes searching, carrying a weight Lena hadn't noticed before. There was no scolding, no assumption that Lena would solve everyone else's problems. Instead, there was an openness, a subtle invitation that made Lena's pulse quicken. "If you want," her mother began, voice soft, hesitant. "If you want to tell me why you've pulled away, I'm ready to listen." The words hit Lena harder than she expected. They were simple, almost ordinary, but they carried a gravity that made her chest tighten. After years of being ignored, dismissed, and taken for granted, her mother was offering her the chance to speak, to finally be heard. Lena sat down slowly, feeling a mix of fear, anger, and hope. She realized that this was the moment she had been preparing for, the moment where her revenge, her assertion of self, would meet a choice that mattered. She could lash out, she could leave, she could let resentment dictate her actions. Or she could speak, not for punishment, but for understanding. For the first time, Lena spoke without hesitation. She told her mother about the countless sacrifices she had made, the endless evenings spent caring for cousins, nieces, and nephews while her sister enjoyed freedom. She described the birthdays, the holidays, the small moments of invisibility that had accumulated into years of pain. She recounted the whispered comments she had overheard, the way Melissa had belittled her efforts, and the sense of being taken for granted. She spoke not with anger alone, but with precision, with clarity, with the quiet power of someone finally refusing to be invisible. Her mother listened. Lena noticed the subtle shift in expression, eyes widening slightly, a tremor in the lips, a tightening of hands. There was no defensiveness, no denial. Instead, there was the slow, fragile unfolding of realization. Lena had spoken, and for the first time, she could see her mother truly processing what had been ignored for decades. The weight of her own negligence, the blindness to Lena's sacrifices, became visible in that moment. It was a revelation, not just for Lena, but for her mother as well, who now faced the consequences of her long-standing assumptions. Melissa joined later, summoned by her mother, and the tension escalated subtly. Lena watched her sister closely, seeing the confusion and unease that had grown over the past weeks intensify. Melissa had always been the one who assumed control, who manipulated situations to maintain her comfort. But now, confronted with Lena's quiet strength and refusal to be used, she appeared vulnerable, almost human for the first time. There was no dramatic argument, no shouting match. Instead, there was a moment of recognition, a realization that Lena was no longer the person who could be ignored or taken for granted. Melissa's voice was low, almost hesitant. "You should have said something," she murmured, guilt threading through her words. "I tried," Lena replied softly, "but no one heard me." The words were simple but carried decades of emotion, a lifetime of frustration and pain compressed into a single statement. It was not revenge in the conventional sense. It was not a punishment, not a calculated strike. It was acknowledgement. It was truth. And for Lena, it was enough. The moment hung in the air, tense and fragile. Lena felt the rush of power she had imagined for so long, the kind that comes from asserting oneself and making others confront the reality they have ignored. But she also felt something unexpected: relief. A sense of release she had not anticipated. The years of holding resentment, the nights spent imagining revenge, had led her to this point, but standing here, seeing the quiet recognition in her mother's eyes, she realized that true satisfaction did not come from making others suffer. It came from reclaiming her voice, her identity, and her worth. Her mother reached for her hand, and the gesture, simple as it was, carried more weight than any words could. "If you want things to change," she said quietly, "they will." Lena nodded, feeling the fire of anger that had driven her for weeks finally settle into something steadier: resolve, clarity, and empowerment. She realized that revenge, in the form she had imagined, was not what she needed. What she needed was acknowledgement, boundaries, and the freedom to live without being consumed by others' expectations. Lena thought back on the weeks of subtle rebellion, the refusals, the small but deliberate acts of resistance. Each one had been a step toward this moment, a preparation for the confrontation that had allowed her to finally assert herself. But the emotional payoff was different from what she had expected. It was not triumph over her family, nor was it satisfaction in seeing them struggle. It was the discovery of a truth she had long denied, that the real victory lies in self-respect, in choosing how to respond to injustice, and in refusing to be invisible any longer. Melissa and her mother remained in the room, quiet but attentive, their reactions muted yet meaningful. Lena sensed that change was possible, that her actions and words had forced them to confront their assumptions and reconsider the way they treated her. It was not instant forgiveness, nor was it complete understanding, but it was the beginning of a shift, a subtle yet undeniable change in the family dynamic. Lena understood that the consequences of revenge could be heavy, that anger and resentment could spiral if left unchecked. She also understood that reclaiming her life, her time, and her identity could be far more powerful than any act of retaliation. As the conversation wound down, Lena felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. The tension that had driven her every action, every refusal, and every moment of quiet defiance now transformed into clarity. She could see the road ahead, a path where she would no longer be the default caretaker, the invisible one, the one whose feelings were secondary. She could live fully, assert herself, and redefine her relationships on her own terms. The fire that had once threatened to consume her had become a guiding force, illuminating the choices she would make moving forward. By the end of the day, Lena understood that revenge, if pursued for its own sake, often leaves nothing but emptiness. She had imagined elaborate schemes, careful plans to make her family feel the weight of their neglect. But standing here, she realized that the true resolution came not from punishment, but from speaking her truth, from refusing to accept invisibility, from allowing others to see her not as a convenience, but as a person with needs, emotions, and limits. The moment was not about dominance or payback, it was about recognition, self-respect, and the possibility of real change. Lena left her mother's house that afternoon with a sense of liberation she had never known. The tension of weeks of planning and restraint gave way to a calm determination. She had faced the ultimate test of her resolve, the choice between sustaining anger or embracing empowerment, and she had chosen wisely. The journey of revenge, she realized, was not about harming others. It was about reclaiming oneself. And in that, she had succeeded. As she walked home, Lena reflected on the emotional journey she had undergone. She understood that healing and assertion were far more satisfying than retribution. The fire of anger that had driven her was now tempered, reshaped into wisdom and clarity. She had learned that revenge could easily become a trap, perpetuating pain rather than resolving it. True power, she discovered, lay in boundaries, voice, and the courage to demand respect. And finally she felt seen.